Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on sensitive data discovery for GenAI. We are about to get started. Before we do, let's just cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving an email with the link to the recording later on today. Also, this webinar is meant to be interactive. We're going to have some polls along the way, so please participate in those. And we also encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can ask the questions by the questions panel that you'll be able to open up with at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll accept questions throughout the webinar, but we'll answer them at the end after we're done with the content. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Min-Hank Ho from Baffle. Min-Hank, please introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Thanks, Ramaz. My name is Min-Hank Ho. I currently head up the product team here at Baffle. Been in many years in data security, and of course, most recently, been focusing on generative AI. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sushant to introduce himself.
Great. Thank you so much, Min-Hank. Hi, everyone. My name is Sushant Rao. I run marketing here at Baffle, and I've been in the tech sector for about 20 years, mostly software and cloud services, primarily focused on cybersecurity and infrastructure. So let's start by getting to know you a little bit. So you should be seeing a poll that pops up on your screen and basically asks the question, which team are you part of in your business? Are you information security? Are you data analytics, data science? Are you part of the GenAI or AI team? Application development? Are you executive/management? Or other consultant, press, or analyst? Go ahead and submit your vote. We'll give it a 30 seconds for people to kind of vote. See how the poll is running. It looks like we're pretty much running a little bit heavy toward information security. Next up is data analytics and then consultants. And lastly, in app dev. You guys give a 10-second countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. All right. So now that we know a little bit about the audience, let me turn it over to Min-Hank to run through the session.
Sure. Thank you, Sushant. First, before we get too deep into it, I just want to clarify the difference between sensitive data discovery and just general data discovery that you might do for, in data science and analytics. I saw that we have a lot of folks from the data science teams. So data discovery typically means something very specific to that field in terms of being able to identify where the data sets are, what's in that data set, the quality of that data set. That's a little bit different from why someone might do a sensitive data discovery. So for purposes of sensitive data discovery, the problem that we're really trying to solve is one of compliance, right? The data that you're looking for are the things that are regulated, the things for which if you were to lose it or disclose it without proper controls, then essentially you'll be in violation of laws or industry compliance standards. And with that, with that context in mind, we can now take a look at what exactly are the goals of the sensitive data discovery process and tools. Obviously, the first thing you want to do is to be able to actually locate the data. Knowing where it is, it's kind of like knowing is half the battle. Well, in this case, knowing is maybe roughly a quarter of the battle. But no matter what, you still need to know. But that is not the end of the process or the end goal, obviously. The next thing that you want to do after you locate that data, and this is kind of similar to other form of discovery, is you need to classify it. It's not sufficient to know that you have something that's regulated. You actually need to know the type of data it is so that you know which regulations apply and what sort of technical control is required to be placed on it so that you're in compliance. So these two typically form the core parts of what a sensitive data discovery process is and what the tool should be able to assist with. That said, just being able to locate and classify, right, is not the end, especially when in a compliance context. For compliance, you typically need to be able to have some means of being able to protect that data, or the term that auditors like to use is to have some form of control over it. The control can be technical, the control can be manual, but no matter what, you have to be able to prove that all that sensitive data that you have is sort of well regulated in some way so that it's not just arbitrarily given out without any sort of tracking, any sort of limits. And of course, the last part of that process, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, is the verification and reporting of the controls. I talked about an auditor. That's usually who you would need to report to. You need to have some way to easily actually demonstrate that you've actually put controls on that sensitive data. So this is kind of the life cycle of the whole discovery and protection process, and of course is really what the goal of sensitive data discovery is. For the purpose of this particular webinar, of course, we're really focused on the discovery and classification side. So in other words, be able to locate where it is and classify it. I just wanted to make sure that we all keep in mind that just because you discover it, it's not the end of the journey. You really need to also take into consideration when you use sensitive data discovery tools and processes that you're actually setting yourself up for proper controls and verification and reporting. Okay, so now that we kind of talked about the general process and goals, I'm just curious whether or not any of you out there have already used or started using data discovery tools. So among the options are either you're currently already using one and it's already helping you finding PII, EPHI, and whatnot, or perhaps you're thinking about it because someone in your organization has identified compliance requirements, or perhaps it's just not on the radar. Right? Just go ahead and submit your vote. Be interested, just take a quick look. We'll give a few seconds here to take a look. All right, so far, most of the folks are considering it, and they're not actively using one right now, and that kind of makes sense. There's a little bit of a chicken egg problem right now, right? Which is if you are looking, the topic, of course, is on discovery, but also the fact of the matter is that if you have already found some data, you might be looking at something else like the protection side of things. So yeah, so a few more seconds. It looks like a vast majority are considering, but not yet have one in place. Okay, so let's go ahead and move along. So one of the things that sticks out, I think, about this particular webinar is that we're focusing sensitive discovery specifically on generative AI. And at first glance, and maybe we're just tagging on generative AI in the title, like so many other companies out there are just trying to ride the wave. But actually, there's very specific considerations that you need to have, or at least generative AI, certain situations generative AI creates that makes sensitive data discovery particularly important, and also certain types of sensitive data discovery needs to be done. What I have here in this picture is kind of a rough lay of the land of the various data stores and workflows in a generative AI application or a generative AI process. Truth be told, I borrowed this from Gartner. So this is not just an arbitrary picture we come up with. This is something that they've seen enterprises more or less set up. Now, one of the big issues with generative AI, and I saw, again, many of you are from the data side, so you know this, there is a need to collect and store a lot of data as input into generative AI pipelines and generative AI applications. They may come in the form of data for training and fine-tuning. They may come in the form of documents for context in a retrieval augmented generation use case. And of course, what tends to happen is the output of that also might be stored in the form of chat history and logs. Of course, that also results in aggregation of log data. The thing is, when you're starting to use private data, in other words, data from your own company, customer databases, marketing profile databases, just whatever it is that you've already collected from actual end users, a lot of that is going to have sensitive data values. And that kind of gets to the second point, which is that all those sensitive data values are intermingled with the rest of that data. And, most of the GenAI use cases you've seen today, ChatGPT and whatnot, tend to be trained and built on public data. But once you get into the enterprise use case, it's all mixed in. And unfortunately, the sensitive portion of the data needs to be protected. And the reason why it needs to be protected, of course, is that there are these data privacy and security compliance requirements. Some of you may be familiar with things like GDPR. Over here in California, we have something called CCPA. Even if it's not like a corporate level, a governmental level regulation, you might have industry ones like PCI, which affects credit card numbers. There's various SEC financial rules that talk about like, you protect certain data. There's just all sorts of regulations that's there, and also increasing number of regulations that's going to require all these sensitive data and PIIs to be protected. Okay, so then the next question that we have to ask, especially since we do still have some folks on the call who are currently using discovery tools, and I'm sure those of you who are considering new tools have already sort of explored your options. Why is it that we just can't use what's already out there? And they're actually, the whole idea of sensitive data discovery has been around for a long time. They tend to be classified into this entire sort of market of products known as data security posture management. They tend to help you, those tools help you find where perhaps you might have sensitive data or you might have misconfiguration in some of your data layer components, and hopefully try to reduce the risk. So the thing is, those tools were designed for different use cases at a different, in a different era, right? I mean, it's still active today, but GenAI is kind of a new frontier. And the reason why it's not quite well suited for GenAI, first and foremost, is that those tools are actually not quite granular enough for the needs of generative AI and the way that the data flows in generative AI. What I mean by not granular enough is that as far as generative AI is concerned, your sensitive data is kind of being used and processed at a field level, or I would call it the data value level. You'll hear this term called token, which loosely translates to like a word. It's actually a part of the word, and that's what's actually being generated and being outputted quite a lot as you get these responses. That's a level of granularity that generative AI is dealing in, and that you will need to be able to operate at that level of granularity in your discovery to make sure that you have the proper controls on it. And I'll sort of describe that in a little bit more depth later in the presentation. But that is the first thing that I want you to sort of remember, is that there's a granularity issue just because in the past, there was never a need to be tracking sensitive data at that level. The second issue with existing tools is that they tend to be somewhat limited in their ability to grow and uptake the latest capabilities. That's not to say that they're not enhancing themselves and making better at new revs, but there's a lot of emphasis on using regular expression or other rule-based systems. Even the ones that use machine learning tend to be using their own internally trained and proprietary models. And those are all well and good, but in the AI space, there's a lot of new capabilities that's being introduced almost every day, and that's no exaggeration. And what you want to do is leverage some of the latest AI classification capabilities and discovery capabilities in the form of various models to actually be able to get improved performance in detecting sensitive data in the data sets. And the last part of it speaks to the overall life cycle and the goals of sensitive data discovery, which is discovery is only part of the process. You really want to be in a situation where you can actually complete the protection and control, as well as the verification and reporting. And you want to have that level of integration. Many of the existing tools do actually make an effort to tell you or leverage some form of protection mechanism, but it's usually not their own. Right? They're going to usually tell you to say, well, you have some sensitive data in that particular S3 bucket. You should probably enable access control in that bucket. But notice that the key is you should enable, right? And then you have to then go figure out, or there's a table in the database somewhere, and you should make sure that you revoke the grant. So it's not really that well integrated. And that's because they're all separate, disparate products. So just to make the whole concept more concrete, rather than just me kind of sort of pointing out some of the limitations of the current tool set, I just picked one to sort of drill down into, and just this is the interface screen that describes it. I've removed the name to protect the innocent. After all, we're not trying to say that the existing discovery tools don't work for their current needs. We're just saying that they don't work as well for GenAI. But if you're to take a look at this output of a particular well-known discovery tool from a cloud service provider, you're going to see that the granularity is at the object level. So it's going to be able to tell you that somewhere in your bucket, you have these CSV files or these text files that might actually have some sensitive data. That's pretty good for a traditional use case where you just want to be able to say, I should probably limit access to this bucket because it's got sensitive data. But again, AI deals with tokens of words, so that probably won't be enough. And of course, you also notice that classification detail is a little bit lacking. You can say, well, it's a high severity, finding. In other words, there's probably something in there that you really should do something about, but it's not immediately clear what you should do. In all fairness, you can actually drill down a little bit. So I kind of drilled down and extracted the type of findings that you could actually potentially get if you drill down. But even then, you'll see that it's still somewhat vague, right? Especially if you get the finding that is like multiple. That kind of doesn't help you take action on it properly. So with that, then it's a good time to sort of point out that, or take a look at why it is that GenAI and GenAI use cases specifically need a granular level discovery. Well, let's look at it in context of a common GenAI deployment model called retrieval augmented generation. This is where you might have an application that's going to leverage an existing model that's off the shelf or a service that's already available. But then what you're trying to do is actually use your existing data set in your company or in your organization to actually get meaningful results out of it. Typically, you'll be searching, summarizing, doing Q&A against it. Chatbots are often built using this sort of retrieval augmented generation architecture. Now, your data set is going to contain all sorts of things, and likely PII, such as email address, phone number, full name, and mailing address. These are all things that might be input into your RAG application.
But Minhank, question for you.
Okay.
So if all this data, right, has PII data such as email addresses, phone numbers, etc., doesn't that mean that the docs have to be excluded when you're building your RAG application?
Well, yeah, actually, Sushant, that is a pretty good point. So let's say that you do have these sort of PII and regulated data. In theory, all you really are worried about is controlling those sensitive data values. But because you're essentially feeding the entire document in, and it contains some of it, there's no way to sort of decouple it, right? Remember, we're detecting the sensitive data at an object level at best right now, and we're essentially protecting it at the object level at best. You're essentially stuck with a situation where, to be compliant, you either choose not to feed that particular document in at all, or essentially run afoul of various compliance requirements. And I'm pretty sure InfoSec team will not be happy with that. The problem with not using any doc with any form of sensitive or regular data in there is that it leaves you a trivially tiny data set to work with, which defeats the whole purpose and the value of generative AI applications, right? Part of the value is that it is able to sift through so much data on your behalf and save you tons of time. What you really actually want to do, in the context of generative AI, is really just figure out a way to either anonymize or protect and control just the specific PII and sensitive data values that the compliance regulation covers. And what that does is leave the rest of the data, most of which is not regulated and is just things that is okay for your GenAI application to process and potentially present to end users. And here you can then preserve the value of using GenAI while still meeting all your compliance requirements. And this would be a good segue for us to introduce how Baffle does sensitive data discovery. Having worked on GenAI data protection for quite some time, we realized that what's missing in the sensitive data discovery space is the granular sensitive data discovery capability, that field level of discovery and classification that is needed to be able to actually support compliance for GenAI. So we've introduced this capability where we can actually support going into all the main data store types that GenAI pipeline or GenAI system might have, and be able to discover the sensitive data value in there. We do it using actually AI technology. So essentially we're using AI to secure AI, so to speak, right? We use not the models that you might see typically talked about with GPT and Gemini and whatnot, Those are a different type of model. We use things that are classification models, more specifically a technology called name entity recognition. And that is designed specifically to look at a large body of text and similar types of data and tell you what exactly might be a identifier. They call it entities, but really it's a PII or EPHI and whatnot, and actually help you classify into the appropriate one. And of course, the best part of actually having it be from Baffle is that it allows it to be integrated with our very strong data protection capabilities. It also protects the data at the field level and does it all in one workflow and with no new code changes necessary. I introduced a new concept earlier. I just want to drill down a little bit because I know that a lot of folks on the webinar and just in general are still trying to wrap their head around AI. The main difference between a classification model and an NER model is not too significantly different from what some of the other models are. At the end of the day, what you really have is essentially the model being trained on data sets. Now, this data set is labeled a little bit differently. It's labeled specifically to tell you what various entity types are, or in our case, in our context, PIIs, EPHIs, and where they are. And essentially, you feed lots and lots of this data where the model is just trained on this is what a name looks like, and this is where it typically appears in the text. This is what a phone number looks like. This is where it typically appears. After a certain amount of time, essentially the model is created that is able to actually understand that. And of course, when you're done with the training, like all other GenAI models, you essentially then can give it input where it doesn't have the specific entities located. And of course, as it gets processed through the model, then it can actually use all that training to be able to tell you which entity is what, so it classify it and also help you locate it.
And a quick question for you.
Yeah.
When you talk about this, how do people do the training? Do they provide their own AI models, or does Baffle provide it?
That's a very good point, and that's one of the cool things about Baffle's architecture, right? These type of models are readily available. You'll find them on Hugging Face. You'll find them on various places that actually offer models. There are definitely open source models available. One of the cool things about Baffle's architecture in the sense of data discovery is that we actually allow you to use off-the-shelf models. And not just one model, you can actually use multiple models, and we take care of brokering between the capabilities of these different models so that you can actually always get the most accurate results, and also as ability to discover new types of sensitive data or PII is made available, you can actually pick that up. So here, for example, in this picture, you can see that you might have different models with varying capabilities for discovering different types. With our sensitive data discovery and the use of this broker that's proprietary to Baffle, we one of the first ones to come with this to actually essentially broker the results across all of these models. We can actually generate more accurate results and faster. And on top of that, let's say that a new model comes along with a new capability and even more, I guess, sensitivity. We could actually just pick it up in the next rev, right? As you know, the AI space is moving very rapidly. You can see new models being uploaded and introduced all the time, sometimes causing stock crashes. But regardless of what happens, you know that we actually have the architecture that is able to pick up the latest and greatest capabilities. So, if I were to just quickly summarize what Baffle is doing as far as for generative AI through its sensitive data discovery and data protection capabilities, what we're doing with our new sensitive data discovery product is that we're making sure there is now an option to be able to do sensitive data discovery for generative AI use cases. It is built from the ground up with the intention of supporting data discovery for generative AI data sets, and it's to be able to do discovery on the granularity that's required. And on top of that, we fully recognize that this is a rapidly evolving space. So we architected our solution such that it actually is able to use multiple models and continue to grow and pick up new models along the way. ensuring that it is always going to be the most accurate that we can make it. And of course, keeping in mind that the ultimate goals of sensitive data discovery is making sure that you actually protect and control the sensitive data so that you're in compliance. We have really tight integration with our data protection capabilities, which is we actually have a product called Data Protection for GenAI. And this will ensure that you can have a simple workflow that actually addresses the problem of compliance for your GenAI applications end to end. All right, with that, I will turn it back over to Sushant to maybe take things away or take final takeaways.
Great. Sorry, I had a little trouble. So a couple things, right? One of the things that we're seeing is that generative AI, it's creating new data security and privacy compliance challenges due to the scale and concentration of data. One of the things that you may be seeing if you're following GenAI is training data requires a lot of data. So what companies are doing is they're starting to collect all the different kinds of information that they have, structured, unstructured, and then because they have so much of it, it creates a weakness, right? And the weakness is if someone gets access to it, oftentimes companies will put that data into an object store and they forget to put the right permissions on it. So now you have entirely lots of data that could be available to hackers. So you need to put reasonable guidelines in place to ensure that the GenAI project, right, isn't going to lead to a data breach. One of the other things you're going to find is that the existing data discovery tools, they're not designed for GenAI. And the main reason is that they don't have the granularity that's needed to define data-centric protection, right? The example that Minhank showed of documents that have some pieces of PII data, currently today, you would have to pull those out because of the PII data. What you need to do is find not only the document, but you need to find the fields that have that level of PII data, so then you can, mask that data. What we've built is data discovery for GenAI, and it's really designed for the ground up for generative AI applications. It provides the granular findings that can be directly used to create security policies at the field level so that you can meet compliance. I think these are really important, right? Just the key takeaways is GenAI is new. It is taking data at a scale and concentration that we have not seen before. The current existing tool sets don't help you find the pieces of PII data that is really keeping, that can cause a data breach, and we're able to help. So with that, I had a question for you. Would you like to try Baffle Data Discovery for GenAI? If you click on the side, you should see the poll. I don't see it on my screen. Hormaz, would you mind push? There it goes. And again, this is Baffle Data Discovery for GenAI. It'll be good to see if this is making sense to you. Go ahead and vote. We'll give it another 10 or so seconds to let everyone vote. It looks like people are interested in trying it, which is great. It means that it makes sense. And so with that, let's talk about next steps in QA. So the data discovery for GenAI is currently in preview. On the right-hand side, you see the QR code, and there's also the link that you can just type out. But go ahead and do the QR code, and it'll take you to the data discovery for GenAI page. On that page, you should see a form that allows you to sign up and to be informed when the product is generally available. And in the meantime, if you want to learn more about the product capabilities, you have it there, and this webinar will be available from that page as well. So with that, let's address some of your questions. And it looks like we do have a couple of questions. Let's see. Minhang, first question is, when will the product be generally available?
Yeah, well, I guess you touched on that already. As we just said, it is in the preview phase right now. But go ahead and sign up, and basically you can kick the we're trying to constrain the number of people who actually try it. But if you do get picked, you get to kick the tires, and of course, you can always wait till the GA timeframe, in which case it'll be open for everyone.
That makes sense. Next question, what about structured data? It's a fair point. What we've highlighted on data discovery for GenAI, Lily seems to cover unstructured data like files and things like that. What about structured data?
Yeah, actually, we support structured data as well. One of the reasons we didn't emphasize it in this particular webinar is that most of the time when people think about GenAI, they associate it with unstructured data, like documents. But as your organization build out your GenAI applications, you may find that the source data or the context data, source data being, say, the data you might use for training, or the context data that you use for retrieval augmented generation, actually originates from a structured data store. Now, typically, a lot of GenAI pipelines, you might first export it into a document and then consume it that way into your AI application. That said, there are definitely use cases where you might actually directly extract it from the data source. So we actually, in our current sensitive data discovery tool, we have connectors that can go into structured data store and actually do sensitive discovery in there as well.
Awesome. It looks like that's all the questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Hormaz to wrap up the webinar. Hormaz?
Okay, well, thank you, Sushant, and thank you, Minheng. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. And thank you to our audience. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for making this webinar interactive. We really appreciate it. As a reminder, you will be getting an email with a link to the webinar later today, and please feel free to share this webinar with your friends and colleagues. With that, we hope you enjoyed the webinar and hope to see you all next time. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.